They acquire maybe 4 to 6 hospitals in a geographic region. And then they say, all right, this is our trauma center. This is our labor and delivery hospital. This is our ortho and neuro hospital. And so you're seeing more specialized hospitals. Then they only need those required items. So that's not going to be the case, though, for our 300 to 400 bed hospitals. They're the ones that, are at risk for more product expiration than others.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we will be speaking once again, returning to the show, Ashlea Souffrou, founder and CEO at SxanPro. We're going to be talking about the hidden costs associated with having bad data or just a lack of data thereof that really are impacting not only the finances, but also patient care. We're going to dive all into that today, Hayes, with Ashlea, who has been a great guest in the past, has actually been one of our experts on our expert series a few years ago, and really is a wealth of knowledge.
She is the bomb. She knows a ton of things. And if you stick around, you're going to learn a little bit about a trick about crash carts. So come on and listen, and we're going to have a great time today.
All right. We'll be right back with Ashlea after a short break.
Bam! I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
We are speaking now, actually, once again, returning to the Power Supply podcast, Ashlea Souffrou, founder and CEO at SxanPro. And we're going to be talking about the hidden costs of bad data or the lack of data in healthcare systems. And Ashlea, I know it's been a while since you came on the show, but we have talked previously about UDI. You definitely did one of our expert series on Power Supply as the UDI expert for a year. And, talking a lot about standardization in data and the availability of data and how we pull it in. But sometimes we still just don't get it. And sometimes when we get it, we don't get it right. And so we're going to talk through some use case scenarios that you've experienced in your day-to-day work and how this all kind of ties together and contributes to really waste in healthcare that we just can't suffer anymore because of the current financial climate.
Well, thank you for having me. I love chatting with you guys. So I'm excited to share what's been happening in all the hospitals that I've been able to visit over the last 12, 18 months. I've been coast to coast and everywhere from the basements to the C-suite. So I'm excited to share with the listeners about just kind of what's happening in general and what maybe some of these unique hospitals are doing to solve for some of these challenges.
I think it's really interesting because people really appreciate hearing what's happening at other hospitals, right? Sometimes we'll have somebody on who's working on the front lines and they can kind of share what's happening there. But to really get that 20,000 foot view from somebody like yourself who's working with so many different ones and specifically in this area, it's pretty valuable. And I'm interested to hear, the themes that draw out of today's conversation.
It's pretty exciting. I think some of the themes are pretty consistent when I'm meeting with the senior leadership team in hospitals, which is how do we get our hands around the dollars that we're losing to outdates, the dollars that are going into the, being wasted in bins. But now more than ever, how do we improve our operational efficiencies and get around from these manual processes that are actually costing us, millions of dollars in some cases. Additionally, how do we have more visibility and get more controls in our hospital system to ensure, patient safety and patient outcomes?
Can I ask a question as it relates to, or maybe it's for the benefit of any supply chain execs that's listening? Obviously, you've been in dozens and dozens and dozens of hospitals all across the U.S. Are there any ORs and supply chain that are doing it really, really well? Are there problems in every OR, basically, is what I'm asking?
There are problems in every single space. They're not always the same problem. I will say there are some health systems that we work with that are doing a phenomenal job. And those hospitals are doing such a great job because even when they have a solution for one problem, they're now saying, how do I build a metric for this other issue that we have? So they might have a really great inventory solution that has visibility in all PAR locations, even including past the red tape, which is where I usually see the most, our biggest issues is those are tend to be managed by clinical and they're not on PAR locations. But in the spaces where they have a pretty well managed system, they're having issues with consignment. They're having issues with PPI. I had 2 different calls last week, 2 totally different health systems, and we were reviewing their just annual data review. And they said, why are we still finding 3 to 5% of our inventory that doesn't match to our master data file? And that's a question that, I think is something we have to continue to talk through. The answer for each one of them individually was different. One was lack of control of consignment inventory. Most of those products lived in those vendor rooms. They didn't have a PAR location, and there's a lot of risk. We can talk about how that impacts your rev cycle management and scanning inventory into the patient files. And then you have another set where they just have a significant amount of substitutes and they hadn't been creating those items into their master data file.
So to make everybody feel better, nobody's 100%. I mean, even, everybody has some holes in their system somewhere is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the biggest trends I'm seeing right now is how do we clean up our master data file and get some synergy between what's in our ERP and our EMR. What's happening in our ERP systems right now is that if the products, because those 2 things don't speak to each other for those of you that are not aware. In general, there's some sophisticated systems, but I would say 80% of hospitals or more, those 2 systems don't speak to each other. So if they're if a nurse is logging every single product in that's being used on the case and they can't find one specific number, they're keystroking that in and it can add an additional line item. So one of the things that we're seeing right now is the IT, clinical, and supply chain teams coming together to say, all right, we need to do an audit of everything that's on our shelves past our PAR locations and including our PAR locations to ensure that do we actually have what we say we have, and how can we clean up this master data file and remove these, in some cases, tens to 20s to hundreds of thousands of line items that are just really outdated.
I heard 3 things in there too. I heard a data structuring issue where, hey, if we're not accounting for the PAR location, how could we possibly manage the inventory, right? So it's like system setup and system structure. And then I heard, another thing, which is interoperability, right? The 2 systems aren't talking to each other. But I also heard a manual entry issue and some of that's related to standardized formatting, but it's also the fact that a human is entering it. So unless there was, some perfect structuring, if somebody is manually entering it, it only takes one small mistake and all of a sudden the data's gotten away from you. So I hear 3 different things that are happening. What are some ways to kind of tackle maybe the manual part of it? Have you seen solutions? Because to me, it seems like technology is the only answer to that, because you're always going to be subject to human error unless you can, put some standardized structuring in and prevent the human error factor as well.
Yeah, I think, as we've talked about UDI and G10, I'll always say that was implemented to be able to solve for some of this data connectivity issues. So there's many different technologies that are out there today that are integrating that GTIN, whether it's, through mobile scanning or RFID or the master data cleanup files that are out there with really great, there's companies out there that are working with hospitals nationwide to enrich their master data file, and they're consistently having feeds run on a monthly basis. So, I think that that's definitely where we're seeing our forward-looking hospitals getting their hands around enriching that data file to ensure that when a nurse is at the point of view station, that they actually can scan and capture the right information. But that all comes down to, do we know what we actually have on our shelves? And that's really critical for the success of the data that's going to come from capturing that information while scanning.
Another thing that I've kind of become aware of recently, as it kind of, you're talking about GTIN and device identifiers, is that there can be multiple device identifiers that get assigned by a manufacturer. And so, there's really no warehouse for that to say that this device identifier is the same product as this device identifier, right? Is that a challenge that you've also kind of run into, even with systems that are starting to take a more advanced approach to managing that inventory and leveraging the UDI?
Yeah, what I've seen in some of the implementations is that they start with the warehouse and they say, okay, we've scanned this case. And so that's what they're building into the master data file, because that's often what's being received in. So they want to be able to scan that information if they're doing that at the warehouse level. But the UDI or the GTIN that's on that case package isn't all the way down to the each package, which is what's on the shelves in the hospital or in the OR procedural area. So that's where there's definitely a disconnect.
How does this all tie into costs? You mentioned waste at the beginning, and there's obvious, like, waste is obvious opportunity to improve the bottom line is by reducing waste, right? And most companies know that. We either get more efficient or we charge more. And, we also know that reimbursement's not going to change. The healthcare system can charge more if they want to. It doesn't mean they're going to get more revenue for it, charging more, right? And so we look a lot in healthcare at reducing waste as a way to improve profitability, because costs are still rising, whether our reimbursement rates are or not. And so how do you see kind of some of these data issues contributing to that waste and impacting the financial state of any healthcare organization?
Yeah, so I'll touch on a couple of them. Let's close, like, as an effort to close this section out of talking about the master data file, is if a nurse can't scan the item and the point of use, then they're manually entering it. It also means it's not part of a master data file. So they don't have a pricing built into their system. So that file or that patient record gets kicked to RevCycle, where then they're going to the manufacturer, negotiating a price, and then they're able to send it off to insurance for billing. The systems that I've talked with right now, they have about a 20% gap that's happening with. So when we look at operational waste, you're delaying the amount of time that you're going to be able to receive the revenue back from your insurance companies. You have an entire team of RevCycle that are going back and forth with the manufacturer to try to negotiate a price post use of the product. That's just looking at the impact really to your bottom line of opportunity that if you could have captured that information on the front end, ensured it was in your master data file, you wouldn't maybe need as many bodies looking up that information. And more importantly, you're going to see that revenue come in more quickly. So I would say that's, where those conversations that I'm having right now with leadership teams are, we really need to get our hands around what's on the shelf, what's coming in the hospital. The second piece that I'm hearing a lot of folks talk about right now is the waste associated. And again, these are resources and people with outdated preference cards, too much product on the preference card, which results to too much product on the shelves. We're wasting time picking these products. Then they're not getting used. They get put back in a bin. And the biggest time suck is reverse engineering, putting those products back on the shelf. So there's a huge opportunity there, and there's some cool technologies, and it's exciting to see the innovation that's coming around this space, because there's a ton of opportunity that impacts, the patient care. One, we want to ensure that the doctors have what they need for the patients, but we also don't need to have 20 to 30% more items on the shelves, costing our hospitals more money than they, to spend more money than they actually need.
How are hospitals tackling that today? that particular issue, overstock and things like that. Is somebody like sitting around with a spreadsheet trying to, pull reports and figure out how to get a handle on it? Are people more like in-person projects where, to like what you said, you're throwing some bodies at it, where they're going out and trying to gather that inventory and get a handle on it that way? Like, what is the current state for addressing that? Or are a lot of them just kind of living with it because of the absence of a really decent technology or strategic plan to manage it?
So again, as we always say, there's a little bit of everything out there in hospitals, but I would say what I'm seeing as far as the process in most of the hospitals is value analysis really being tasked with being part of this. And with the value analysis teams, they're focused specifically on specialties. So they'll start with, all right, we're just going to work with ortho, and maybe we need to just start with implants only. And so they're really dissecting down to, the specialty, and in some cases, the line items of what do we have. There's a large system in Tennessee that we were working with, and they were trying to tackle, they're trying to tackle mesh. And they're like, we have a team of people right now with a pen and paper writing all of these down. And then they're going to meet with the value analysis teams, which are going to meet with the physicians and go through these items line item by line item to determine which ones they actually need. And then they're going to take that into their system that they have today to try to update what needs to be on the pref card. And then they take that information over to supply chain and they make those changes to remove those products from the shelves and or consolidate or turn into consignment. So there's a lot of steps that have to take place to tackle these problems, which is why I think, Justin, when you said, are most people living with it? I think most people are living with it. There's only so many resources that our hospitals have right now to tackle these challenges. But I will say you have to be moving quarterly. And I think a lot of the stuff can happen quarterly and saying, okay, what are we going to tackle this quarter, and getting ahead of some of these challenges. The thing I've been sharing most frequently is our hospitals are trying to solve all of their problems right now. They're saying, I need to have this integrated system that's going to take 3 to 4 years to implement. And then once we have that, then we'll be fixed and everything will be, gravy. That is wonderful. And we need to be moving into a more digitized world. And I support that. And we're working alongside our hospitals that are tackling some of those initiatives. But we also have to be okay with what can get me 50% right now. And what are the things that we can be doing to ensure that we're, trying to at least go after some of these initiatives that you truly can see ROI on immediately or within weeks. And so that's where, my focus has been with hospitals out there, whether that's how do you tackle your consignment issues? Have you looked at what you're being charged with for missing stock? How are you auditing your consignment inventory today and ensuring that what your reps say you have on the shelf is actually on the shelf? That's a huge opportunity. How do you look at some specialty items that we were talking about with mesh, being able to reduce the amount of mesh, which is actually what we found is one of the top 10 items that goes in a hospital.
Interesting.
Yep. And so.
And let me ask you a question. Is that because the shelf life is so much shorter than other products, or is it something that is just typically ordered in overstock because inventory management is elusive, or is it a combination?
It's a combination. It's definitely a large PPI product. So physician preference item, you need different sizes. The expiration dates aren't, in some cases they're less than 12 or they're 12 months, but they're usually 12 to 24 months. It's one of those products that you have to have on the shelf if you need it. And so you're going to need the different sizes, the different styles. And so this is where it can be risky for a hospital, though, is if physicians are if they're divided on which mesh style they want, now you have 20 sizes of each different brand. And a thing of, meshes can be $2,000 to $6,000 depending on, and probably even more in some cases, depending on what it is. So that's why it can be such a lofty expense.
I also wonder, it's not, obviously, like you said, there's a variety of meshes, so you have to have a pretty broad stock for any given scenario. But also if you're a facility that doesn't do a lot of procedures that require the mesh, and yet you still need to have it on hand, it's almost like the reason why you see these centers of excellence developing, and they're sort of like, hey, here's where we triage people, to be able to do that. But then at the same time, I think in those procedures, sometimes, proximity of care for, a patient getting in is really important too. And so you can't necessarily send them 4 hours away for these procedures, right? And so you kind of wind up in this like catch-22. So it's almost like you either need a way to look at inventory holistically across the entire health system to be able to reallocate, or you kind of have to deal with the fact that you can't do some of these procedures except in your larger facilities in a healthcare organization. Is that what you've seen kind of the thought process be for a lot of the leadership?
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing too with the acquisition of hospitals, right? They're becoming more specialized. They say they acquire maybe 4 to 6 hospitals in a geographic region. And then they say, all right, this is our trauma center. This is our labor and delivery hospital. This is our ortho and neuro hospital. And so you're seeing more specialized hospitals. Then they only need those required items. So that's not going to be the case though for our 300 to 400 bed hospitals. They're the ones that are at risk for more product expiration than others.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, in comparison to their total spend.
So, we had a really great interview with Lisa Farmer. And one of the things that she said during that discussion was like, she really believed that supply chain could have their own patient experience. And it was a big focus for her to connect her team to the patient so that they could really understand how they influenced that patient's life, not just, something that's a little bit less humanistic. Like you can say outcomes and you can say quality, but they really they're depersonalized words, right? And so they don't necessarily connect you. And since Gary's not here, Hayes, I'm going to go ahead and say it. They don't necessarily connect you with, you want to finish my sentence, Hayes?
I'll give you the privilege and
the mission, right? And so I just feel like, how does this stuff has an impact on patient care and safety, right? Because if you don't have that mesh when you need it, that obviously has an impact. But if you're overstocking, you're maybe you're not in a financial position to invest in things that will help your facilities be a leader in delivering care, right? And so you're playing this walking a tightrope, really. So what is the impact on patient care, all of these inefficiencies? And I know expired product was one, but even the physician's preference items on the count sheet, like that matters too. How do these connect to patient care in the end?
It's a very loaded question, and I'm probably not the only person that should be answering this, but I have some thoughts. One, we talked about expired, but we also have to talk about recalls, right? We find recalled products on our hospital shelves every single month. Now, not every single hospital, but across our network of hospitals that we work with. Those are always sitting in non-PAR locations. So they tend to be the products that are sitting in your operating room or your procedural areas. And the reason for that is the risk teams and the supply chain teams may not know that a product, they know where the product is supposed to be stored in the PAR location, but they don't know that product is also sitting in 3 other, non-identified locations. So from a patient care perspective, huge risk by not having the data around what products are living in the rooms. Where I would actually say, instead of talking about risk, where I see a lot of patient opportunity is I had an opportunity to have a really great conversation with a leader from one of the larger GPOs. And what they're looking at is truly being able to track clinical outcomes now across all of their sites by leveraging UDI and GTIN. And that's being able to scan at the point of use, because historically our hospitals all have called the same product something different. And if we risk the manual entry of, let's just talk about total knees. They might type it in different amongst all the hospitals. So there's not necessarily one language to say this is the exact product. But now if we know exactly what's on the shelf, we know it gets scanned in correctly and the data is in our EMR, the data that you can take from the EMRs, or you can aggregate across many different health systems, you can also then start pulling in physician operating times, physician, turnover times. You can start pulling in all of this information to see, did the total knee from vendor A, which cost 20% more, actually provide better clinical outcomes than vendor B. And so by having the data from the very beginning clean and entered in correctly, it can actually follow that health continuum to the patient. And when we can say, hey, you know what, these products are innovative, but it's costing us 20% more. You're still going to have the clinical outcomes. We can reduce the total amount that we're spending. That means we can reduce the amount that the patient's being charged ultimately for the care.
Yeah, so that EMR to ERP connection is really critical to that initiative, I would imagine, because how do you really look at patient outcomes if you're not connected to, the EMR, and how can you connect the product effectively if the EMR is not connected to the ERP?
Absolutely.
But to your point, though, doesn't it go back to when they enter it? Are they scanning it? Are they doing it manually? Are they calling it a TKA? Do they call it a total knee? I mean, all those different things, right? If it's not all the same at the beginning, it's going to be really hard to kind of clarify all that, it seems to me.
Well, and the rev cycle piece. How do you connect the rev cycle solution? Because that may also not be, built into the EMR or the ERP either, right? So that can be a completely separate platform as well.
Completely agree. Yeah, I think our hospitals truly are paying attention to where are the areas that we have manual processes. An article came out by Owens and Minor, and they said that even the hospitals that have implemented some type of technology solution to help them solve for being, have digital transformation within their supply chain, 40% of them still require manual work. So the fix isn't always just going to be in one huge health system. We have to consistently be looking at our processes and what other things can we improve to ensure that we're using as much data and digitizing it as frequently as possible. Another area we haven't talked about, but it's again another hot topic, are crash carts. So this was new for me in the last year, and one of our hospital systems in Texas came to us. They presented at ARM on this as well, and they said we need to get our hands around how we're managing crash carts because it's costing us a large expense due to product expiration. We have clinical teams that are having to go through and look for these outdated products. And we are, we're just constantly moving these products all around, and we're having to manually go through and check to see what's in each one of these carts. And so they partnered with their distributor to implement UDIs on custom trays for every single one of their carts. And then they're using technology to track those carts so that they know what products are expiring. They've been able to remove their headcount from 3. I can't remember. I think they reduced it by 3 people. I don't want to say remove. They reallocated those resources to do things that are better than, looking for outdates. They were able to remove the work from the clinical team. So now they're able to spend more time at the patient bed instead of looking for outdated products, which we know patient satisfaction scores are driving revenue as well. And so these are the types of things that our hospitals are looking at and trying to implement these processes because they truly are having impact on revenue.
That's genius. The custom packs, I've definitely seen that movement, around inventory management, but for the crash carts, that's genius. There's so much inventory that's in there. The one thing you have going for you on a crash cart is it's typically locked. So you know that the inventory has not been, sort of pilfered over time. So you've got a pretty good snapshot. If you create that as a PAR location, and then you whittle down the inventory by having the custom packs, it becomes very manageable. And, if you've got to restock a cart or whatever else, that makes it so much easier to reallocate too, because you're not talking about onesie twosies in drawers all through that cart. That's really smart. So have you seen them create the PAR locations then for those custom packs in the crash carts, or are they not going quite to that level?
So each crash cart's a PAR location.
That's awesome.
Yep. And then when
That's
you
awesome.
open one drawer, you don't have to replace any of the other drawers because those remain locked and they just know what's been opened in let's say the top tray. They can pull that out and then they can replace it. But one, right? So here's an entire project where they were like, we're doing a ton manually. It's costing us money from outdated product and from having lack of visibility to what's in these areas. How can we leverage technology, leverage data, to reallocate resources and improve patient care. And all of that is wrapped up into this one initiative, and they're having, great financial cost recovery from it as well.
Well, and a big initiative prior to the pandemic was SKU reduction. And then all of a sudden, out of supply chain resiliency, we've got to add a bunch of SKUs so that we have kind of our secondary and tertiary options in the case of, a shortage or a back order or anything. And so we put all this initiative into doing SKU reduction, and then we had to blow the SKUs up, these custom packs, and managing those locations now seemed daunting in the past, but it's actually maybe helping get the SKU reduction, and then you can leverage a technology like you're talking about to capture that inventory and better manage it, where you might have seen that as nearly impossible in the past. So, Ashlea, this has been a great conversation. Anything else you want to add in terms of that's a great story. I don't know if you've got any other, cool ideas that you're seeing out there that you might want to share with the audience, but that is a really new idea to tackling a pretty age-old issue in healthcare.
Yeah, I think the last one I would touch on is just the returns. As I think I mentioned earlier, it's a huge problem for our hospitals. They are overpicking these cases, and then they have several third shift folks that are having to put product back at night, and there's high risk for patient, right? If it's a saw blade, all the packaging looks the same. How do you know you have the right saw blade in the right spot? So we're starting to see hospitals now take on initiatives to track what's being returned as one of those initial first steps for improving the pref cards, so that they can say, all right, consistently over the last 6 weeks, and they're tracking it to the pref card. This pref card, we've returned these products, and they have data that now they can go to the clinical teams and say, hey, this is what it's costing us from a time, labor perspective, as well as the cost of the product we have on the shelf. Is this something that we can remove? And so there's some labor that's part of that conversation, but the outcome that you're getting of being able to remove those products and reduce maybe your on-hand inventory is critical. And those are the things that I'm starting to see some of these forward-looking supply chain leaders tackle and have value around. I think sometimes you look at these manual processes or these projects and you're like, is the juice really worth the squeeze? And we're starting to see that consistently and happen from our supply chain folks that truly are wanting to reduce the SKU counts, truly are seeing that they are over par and want to be innovative and bring solutions back to their organization.
So that's interesting, Ashlea. You're talking about the returns, and I'm just wondering, has anybody really ever scanned or tracked that data in the past? I feel like it's just, not used, and then it's going back on the shelf, and there's really been no mechanism for figuring that out. Are you saying that of customers that are starting to scan that so that they're just collecting that data point on the returns? And then, if you don't have that data, what's the impact? Where's the waste on that process?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would say we're just starting to see our hospitals scanning and wanting to take that initiative. Prior to that, there are, the RFID technologies that are out there, and those would account for the returns, but most RFID are sitting in your cath lab IR space. They're not sitting in your operating room. So this is a data point that they historically have not been able to capture at all, because it would be required manual processes. The impact that it has on the hospital, though, is if Dr. Smith has the same 5 procedures and she has the same stapler on every single one, but doesn't actually use it, and the PAR level is set at 5, all 5 of those products are going to get pulled. And if they have a digital ERP system, it's going to automatically purchase another box of 5. And then at the end of the day, you're going to end up putting 5 back. So now you're 5 over par and you have 10 on hand. And until that is reconciled, it's going to continue to create this problem. So there's been many times that I've worked with hospitals, and we'll walk around and we'll see these areas where they have 20, 30 different single items. And the question is, what's happening? And when we dive into it, it's generally because they have a physician, they practice the same surgery each day. And so they just are having a PAR issue. So by tracking that information, being able to show that these are consistently not being used, now you can go to Dr. Smith and say, hey, do we actually need to have this? Is it okay if we just have 1 or 2 instead of needing, all of these? And, or can it be a specialty item that your team can come and pick if needed?
Yeah, it's almost like if you could pull the reports to identify if this is an issue for you, just, pull the utilization reports versus the actual build report, right? And look at that discrepancy, and it'll kind of tell you exactly how often, a particular product is being picked but not used if you don't scan it today. But that doesn't help you solve the power issue, does it? So to get that real-time data is so important. Ashlea, a great interview once again. Thanks so much for coming on the Power Supply podcast. Anything you'd add before we wrap up?
No, thank you for having me. I love traveling across the country. So I would say if anybody's listening and wants to tackle some unique problems, reach out. I love to try to brainstorm and share what I'm seeing as best practices from our other hospital partners.
That was Ashlea Souffrou, founder and CEO at SxanPro and Hayes. I really like the final story that she told us, or one of the final stories around the crash carts. I just think what an innovative way to take several different emerging either concepts or technologies to really better manage something that has been a frustration for healthcare organizations across the country. And as we do see more technology adoption and even just innovation in how we manage supplies, we can start to combine some of those and solve some of these age-old problems. So it was really great. There's definitely a lot of hidden costs and a lot of waste that we can still tackle, but I think that manual effort is an area that we just have to continue to strive to remove from the equation.
Oh, it's like, to me, it's kind of fun to hear these stories because you have things that we've been doing for decades and decades. And now you have new technology and you kind of put a new spin on it. Yeah, it absolutely can really impact crash carts and expiration and all these other things. So yeah, she brings a really good viewpoint of things, and it was really good. So I'm glad we did this, and I learned a lot.
That's it for this week's show. Big thanks to Ashlea Souffrou for coming on again, and on behalf of Hayes, Gary, who didn't make this one, and myself, thanks for listening to this episode of Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.